Today's episode is sponsored by Lingoda, an incredible online language school. And Lingoda are offering something amazing for thinking in English listeners, the Lingoda Language Sprint. Practicing and learning English every day is essential if you want to quickly grow and develop your skills. When I first began to study Japanese, I took multiple classes a week and spent hours studying every day. And now I have been able to work, research, and build relationships in Japan. Committing so much time and effort to English can be difficult and expensive, but this is where Lingoda can help. Lingoda's language sprints are 2-month learning challenges where you take lessons intensively. You can either take the sprint challenge with 15 classes a month, or if you're really committed, the super sprint challenge with 30 classes a month. What's the prize if you take all the classes and complete the challenge? Your money back. If you complete Lingoda's sprint, you will get 50% of your money back. And if you complete the super sprint challenge, you will get 100% of your money back. You heard me right. Complete the super sprint and you will get those 60 English classes with professional English teachers for free. If you're looking for an opportunity to study English every day, immerse yourself in the language and intensively learn, sign up for Lingoda's Sprint Challenge right now. Click the link in the podcast description for more information and use my code THINKINGSPRINT for €20 off your sprint registration. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. France has recently banned some short-haul flights in order to reduce the country's carbon emissions. How bad is flying for the environment? Is France's ban effective? And should we go further in order to protect the planet? Let's talk about this on today's episode of Thinking in English. You can find the full transcript over on the Thinking in English blog. Click the link in the description, it's completely free. Follow me on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter, on all of the different social medias, and leave the podcast a 5-star review on Spotify or write a review on Apple. Here is today's vocabulary list. To ban. To ban. To refuse to allow something, especially officially. As in, she was banned from driving for 2 years. Sustainable. Sustainable. Causing or made in a way that causes little or no damage to the environment and therefore able to continue for a long time. For example, the website encourages sustainable fashion through swapping. Aviation. Aviation. The activity of flying aircraft or of designing, producing and keeping them in good condition. For instance, aviation safety is increasingly important. Contrail. Contrail. A white line left in the sky by an aircraft that consists of water vapour that has condensed or turned back into very small drops of water. As in, many of the contrails we can see are from jets flying out of a nearby Air Force base. Domestic. Domestic. Relating to a person's own country. As in, he has taken 10 domestic flights this year. Objection. Objection. The act of expressing or feeling opposition to or dislike of something or someone. For example, a couple of people raised objections to the proposal. Viable. Viable. Able to work as intended or able to succeed. For instance, in order to make the company viable, it will unfortunately be necessary to reduce staffing levels. To offset. To offset. To pay for things that will reduce carbon dioxide in order to reduce the damage caused by carbon dioxide that you produce. For example, we offset all our long-haul flights. If you are an avid consumer of the news, You may have seen headlines last week reporting that France has banned short-haul flights. After voting on the ban a few years ago, the new law has just come into force. The rule states that if a city can be reached in 2.5 hours by train, then you will not be allowed to fly to that location. The idea is to reduce the pollution and carbon emissions that come from flying and encourage people to use public transport more often. And the reason is simple. Flying is terrible for the environment. I'll talk a little more in detail about this in a few minutes, but if you look at the data, flying is always the least sustainable way to travel. This might make you uncomfortable. It certainly makes me uncomfortable. I fly relatively often. Moreover, I tend to fly long haul. Most recently, I've flown the London to Tokyo routes, which take at least 12 hours if flying direct, and quite a few hours longer with connecting flights. As much as I try to be environmentally friendly, using reusable plastic bags, recycling, walking instead of driving, the reality is that by flying thousands of kilometers every year, I am contributing far more to destroying the environment than someone who doesn't fly. For many people, this poses a big problem. The desire to be sustainable clashes completely with the love of or need to travel. I remember a friend of mine in university complaining about people buying water in plastic bottles because it wasn't eco-friendly. That same friend flew from Europe to the Pacific Islands, then back to Europe before heading to Asia. What is more damaging to the environment? A couple of plastic water bottles or over 20,000 kilometers of flying? Now, here is a calculation I found online that might shock some of you. Flying from the UK to New York and back releases the same amount of greenhouse gases as you would save by recycling for 20 years. That's right, one flight is the same as 20 years of recycling. In today's episode, I want to look in more detail at how bad flying and travelling really is for the environment. We'll talk about France's decision to ban short-haul flights and discuss whether all countries should do something similar, or perhaps be even harsher to protect the environment. So, how bad is flying really for the environment? Well, there's only one answer. Bad. Flying is bad for the environment. Aviation is responsible for up to 8 or 10% of global CO2 emissions, being caused by travel and tourism especially. And aviation is responsible for about 5% in total. 5% may seem small, but remember how few people actually fly. Over 80%, maybe closer to 90% of people alive have never been on a plane, and even fewer fly regularly or more than once in their life. Moreover, the majority of emissions tend to come from the ultra-rich traveller. The more expensive your seat, the higher percentage of emissions you contribute for the plane, because you tend to take up more space. So in other words, flying business class or first class is more damaging to the environment than flying in economy. But the worst is flying on private planes. Over 50% of aviation emissions come from private aircraft, and a user of private planes can contribute up to 7,500 tons of carbon dioxide to the environment every year. I did a little research here. Right? So the average person in the Democratic Republic of Congo contributes just 0.08 tons of carbon to the environment each year. So, if my math is correct, it would take over 93,000 years for the average person in the Democratic Republic of Congo to release as much CO2 as a private plane user does in 1 year. This is, of course, awful for the environment, and contributing to climate change and global warming. All of those efforts you do to reduce your carbon footprint and live more sustainably are outweighed by flying, especially if you fly in luxury. Moreover, CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions are just part of the problem with flying. Planes also pollute the skies and reduce air quality. In fact, some estimates suggest over 10,000 people a year die directly because of air pollution caused by aviation, and then many more people get sick. Why is flying bad for the environment? Well, there are a few different reasons. The white lines left behind by planes in the sky, called contrails in English, can really contribute to warming. Especially at night, they can trap radiation from escaping from the planet, basically keeping heat on Earth and making Earth warmer. Planes can also produce both carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. I'm sure you've heard about CO2 before. It's a greenhouse gas which contributes to the warming of the atmosphere and climate change. Nitrous oxides have a slightly more complicated environmental impact, but they definitely contribute to poorer air quality. So hopefully you can now all appreciate that flying is the worst thing you can do for the environment as an individual. So with this in mind, let's take a closer look at France's new law banning some short-haul flights. First, what's a short-haul flight? Most definitions online split flights into short-haul, medium-haul, and long-haul. A short-haul flight is usually less than 3 hours in duration. Medium-haul between 3 and 6 hours in the air, while a long-haul flight is over 6 hours. In fact, you can now even talk about ultra-long-haul flights, lasting over 12 hours. France has not banned all short-haul flights. It takes about 1 hour and 20 minutes to fly from Paris to London, for example, but as this is an international flight, it will continue to operate. France has banned any domestic short-haul flight to a city that can be reached by train in under 2.5 hours. For example, it takes 2 hours and 14 minutes on the train from Paris to the city of Bordeaux in the southwest of France. This means you will no longer be able to fly from Paris to Bordeaux. The plan had originally been stricter. The original recommendation was banning any flight to a city that could be reached in 4 hours. But after objections from France's national airline and some other regions, they lowered the threshold to 2 hours 30 minutes. Long-haul flights are obviously the worst for the environment in terms of total emissions. However, these are impractical to ban. We live in a global world. There would be no way to travel to much of the world without long-haul flights. I wouldn't be in Japan without long-haul flights. But all the flight routes France has banned have alternatives. A journey by train. A plane can emit up to over 70 times more CO2 per passenger than a train. And the train tends to be more affordable in France and often takes the same amount of time, as you don't need to travel to an airport. Moreover, short-haul domestic flights have higher emissions per kilometre than long-haul flights do. There also tends to be a lot more short-haul flights around the world every day than there are long-haul flights. France's ban is intended to reduce emissions by removing the possibility of unnecessary flights. While at the moment the plan only actually affects 3 routes, it could be expanded with improvements in France's rail network. And it will be a warning to the aviation industry. France may be the first country to do this, but more countries could follow and be even stricter. In fact, is this something that other countries should seriously consider? According to Greenpeace, yes, the EU should consider banning any short-haul flight with a direct train route taking less than 6 hours. They say that 33% of the busiest flying routes in Europe have viable train connections, and many are actually easier by train. Let's take an example. You want to travel from the centre of London to the centre of Paris. Flying may seem the quickest way to travel. I just went on Google Flights, and the first option that popped up takes only 1 hour and 20 minutes. On the other hand, the Eurostar train from London to Paris takes about an hour longer. However, it's not that clear. The flight I found departs from London Luton Airport and lands at Charles de Gaulle in Paris. Luton is not actually in London, so if you ever visit the UK, be aware of this. Luton is not in London, even though it's called London Luton Airport. It takes about 32 minutes by train from St Pancras International Train Station to reach Luton Airport. You would then need to go through check-in and security, board your flight, and then depart. You would then arrive at Charles de Gaulle Airport, potentially need to go through immigration, collect your baggage, before taking a train to central Paris. It takes around 30 minutes from Charles de Gaulle Airport to Gare du Nord station. In total, this journey would take at least 3 hours in total, but for most of us, it would likely be quite a lot longer, maybe up to 4 or 5 hours. The Eurostar train, on the other hand, leaves and arrives at the same stations, St Pancras and Gare du Nord, in just over 2 hours. It is much more convenient. The issue is price. The average train trip between the two cities is about $100 and needs to be booked at least 2 months in advance. While it is relatively easy to find plane tickets for half that price, which can be booked 2 weeks in advance. For countries to seriously consider making train journeys preferable to short-haul flights, they need to make trains more affordable. But this policy could have real benefits in larger countries, or countries where short-haul flights are much more common. I'm from the UK. No one flies short-haul in the UK, maybe apart from in Scotland to some islands that don't have ferries. But in a place like the USA, it's a perfect candidate. 25% of all flights in the USA are less than 500 miles in distance. What more can we do? Banning short-haul flights in countries and regions would be of great benefit to the environment. But what else can we do? Airlines and aviation companies have suggested some other solutions. Using more sustainable aviation fuels, or building hydrogen or electric planes, for example. But these will take years to implement. The International Energy Agency estimates only 19% of fuel used in airplanes will be sustainable by 2040. A popular approach at the moment is called offsetting. This allows companies to produce harmful emissions, but in return, they give some money to organizations removing harmful emissions from the environment, like planting trees. One suggestion that might seem very controversial with some of you listening is banning air miles, frequent flyer programs, or loyalty schemes. These encourage people to fly more, and considering the damage to the environment, we shouldn't be encouraging this. We shouldn't be encouraging people to fly more. Another approach is for airlines to choose their routes better. I mentioned contrails earlier, which is the aviation industry's biggest contribution to global warming. However, these contrails are not formed everywhere, but in specific places with the correct conditions. A study in Japan discovered that just 2% of flights produce 80% of all contrails. This means that simply changing a few flight paths or the height planes are flying could dramatically reduce the production of contrails and therefore the environmental impact of flying. Flying is such a common thing today, but we do need to make changes in both our individual behaviour and in our global behaviour so that we don't cause too much damage to the environment. So here is today's final thought. Today I've talked about France's decision to ban some short-haul flights and discuss why flying is probably the worst thing you do to the environment. The world needs to change its approach to travel if we are to seriously protect the environment. Whatever approach we choose, it's important to remember that flying is always damaging for the environment. I personally believe governments and countries and companies should be working to make flying more sustainable, but also promote alternative methods of travel. I personally fly long distances regularly, but I've not flown short haul since 2017, and I've only actually flown short haul about 4 times in my life. I kind of like to torture myself by taking long distance bus journeys. It's a really difficult situation to be in. I've flown long distances mainly for work and study, and now I have family in 3 different continents: Europe, Asia, and Australia. I know I will continue to fly in the future to see my family, but when I can, I will always choose to take a bus or a train. When I visited Belgium, I took the bus. Every time I've been to France, I've either taken a train or a ferry. Right? I have never flown short haul in Europe, and at the moment I try and take buses or trains everywhere I go. I hope that companies and governments can make some serious progress in implementing meaningful changes, because everyone loves to travel and people want to visit all of the different parts of the world. But you cannot be sustainable and fly at the same time. It just doesn't work. So I think we really need to make some changes. But what do you think? How often do you fly? Are you like me and you fly long distances, or do you tend to fly short haul? And are you trying to reduce the amount of flying you do? Or do you not care? You can let me know by leaving a comment on the Thinking in English blog on the transcript. The link's in the description. You can leave a comment on Spotify. Hopefully a lot of you will write some messages and let me know your thoughts about this episode. Or you can send me a message on Instagram as well. Always reach out on Instagram. My Instagram is Thinking in English Podcast. I've been posting really regularly over on Instagram. You can keep up with my daily life. And also some useful vocabulary posts and things over on Instagram. I have a Twitter as well, and YouTube. We upload the episodes on YouTube as well, if you prefer to listen on YouTube. So thank you all so much for listening today. Make sure to leave a rating, and if you're interested, join my Patreon subscription. There's currently a 7-day free trial for my conversation clubs. And I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.